What it means to live attentively. Today, when people retire, something interesting begins to happen that many of them, they just didn't expect it. They finally have time. And so they don't have the alarm bells, the rigid schedule. So, but once all that stuff disappears, a new question slowly rises up that many retirees have never had to face before. What do I actually pay attention to now? That question may sound simple, but it is not. In fact, the way a person answers that question often determines the quality of their second half of life. I've noticed this traveling around in the country and talking with people who are retired or close to it. Some people drift once the schedule disappears. Days begin to blend together, a little more television here and there, a little more sitting there, maybe online or just watching this or doing that, some restless sleep at night. Nothing terrible drops down and happens all at once, but gradually a person feels less steady. Like I said, they don't even know what day of the week it is after a while. Other people go in a different direction. They begin to pay closer attention to things they never had time to notice before. They notice their sleep. They notice how their body responds to food. They notice how sunlight changes their energy. They notice their thoughts more carefully. They begin to see life not as something rushing past them, but as something they are participating in again. Now that difference, attention, is one of the quiet dividing lines in retirement. If you go back and read some of the writers from the 19th century, you will see that attention was considered one of the most important habits a person could develop. Writers like Henry David Thoreau spent a great deal of time describing the simple act of observing life closely around him. They believed a person could not live wisely without learning how to notice things first, not rush past them, notice them. That includes the body. Earlier physicians used to speak about health in a slightly different way than we hear today. Now, they paid attention to the patterns, sleep patterns, all of them in the body, energy. So, but that idea still holds true today. It's needed. Your body remembers what you've been doing for years. It remembers whether you stayed hydrated or ran yourself dry. It remembers minerals like magnesium and potassium that keep muscles, nerves, and the heart working smoothly. Now, this is why attention matters so much. In the second act of our lives, many retirees have spent decades solving problems for employers, customers, or their own business. They were once project managers, mechanics, teachers, drivers, engineers, supervisors. They handled complicated responsibilities every day. Now, something interesting happens. You become the project manager of your own health. Be responsible for your own health, not in a dramatic way, not with panic, but with steady observation. You begin to ask simple questions. Am I sleeping enough for repair? Am I drinking clean water with electrolytes instead of just flushing minerals away? Am I getting sunlight during the day? Am I allowing my body periods of rest from constant eating so I can reset? These are not extreme ideas. In fact, many of them were ordinary knowledge 100 years ago, and longer. But attention is what brings them all back to order and brings them back into play. You need to be conscious of these. Now, about a year ago, I heard a story from a retired country doctor that stayed with me, and it explains this idea better than any lecture could, I can tell you. Now, the doctor had practiced medicine in a small Texas town, and he did it for nearly 40 years. He had delivered babies, stitched up farmers who had accidents in the field, and treated just about every common illness a person could ever imagine. By the time he retired, he knew most families in that whole county. He knew everybody, and across several generations. And one afternoon, a younger physician came to visit him. The younger doctor was curious about how medicine had changed over the years. They sat on the doctor's front porch of his house as the sun began dropping toward the trees, and the younger man asked him a question. He said, "Doctor, as you're in the retirement years, what was the most important tool you used in your practice back in the day? Now, the younger physician expected him to mention medication or some kind of medical instrument, but the old doctor shook his head. My most important tool, he said, was attention. The younger man looked very puzzled. The old doctor continued, you see, when I first started practicing, we didn't have all the machines and tests that exist today. So we had to watch people real closely. We watched how they walked in the room. We watched their breathing. We listened to how they described their sleep, their appetite, their energy. He paused for a moment. And something interesting happened when you paid that kind of attention to somebody, he said. You started to see patterns. Some people were exhausted because they never truly rested. Some were weak because they were missing basic nutrition. Some were anxious because their lives had become too rushed and hurried. He leaned back in the chair and looked across the pasture out in the open field. Son, the body will tell you what it needs, he said, but it speaks real slowly. You have to be patient enough to listen. The younger physician sat quietly for a moment, trying to think through all this. And when you listened, he asked, the old doctor smiled at him and said, well, son, a lot of problems started making sense to me. Now, that story may sound real simple. I know it does, but it carries some truth to it. Attention changes how we live. And when we pay attention, we begin to notice the signals our bodies are sending to us. We begin to see how sleep repairs us. We begin to see how minerals help stabilize the system in general. We begin to notice how fasting occasionally gives the body space to rest. Now, you've lived long enough to see trends come and go. You have seen fads rise and disappear. You know that most important things in life are rarely complicated. We get clean water, good food, sunlight, rest, meaningful work, or purpose. These things have supported human health for centuries and centuries. And perhaps the greatest advantage of retirement is that you now have time to pay attention to all that again. Not as a decline, but as the second act of a life that is still glowing, still learning, still evolving. And you have wisdom along the way that you can offer others. Because, younger people, as I say, they're watching. Children are watching. Grandchildren are watching. And when they see someone living attentively, living deliberately, as Thoreau said, and calmly, managing your health, your habits, your thoughts, they begin to realize something very special about you. Growing older does not mean becoming less useful. It means becoming more aware. And that awareness is one of the most valuable things a person can pass along. I don't have all this figured out. I'm still working on this myself. So let's keep moving forward on this journey together. Thank you for watching. I appreciate you.